welcome to our webinar today on Intranets Evolve, the impact of the social revolution. And so we have a really lively discussion planned for you today. And I have here with me today Joel Oleson from ViewDo Labs. And Joel, most of you know him as SharePoint Joel. He is a global collaboration evangelist and a community builder and strategist. So I'm very excited to have Joel joining me today and for this webinar with you all. And so I'm going to let Joel introduce himself quickly to you all. Hi, Joel. Good afternoon.
Hey. Great to be talking to everybody today. Great to be here with Portal Solutions. Excited to talk about this social revolution and talk about what's going on.
That's great. Well, Joel has quite a history, quite a background with SharePoint, and a lot of insight to share about social technology and how it's impacting intranets and the way we do business and how we can increase and improve productivity. So I'm very excited to have him here with us today.
I could give you a little bit of background for those on the call who don't know who I am. I've been working with SharePoint for about 13 years now, and have been working with Yammer for nearly 3 years. So I'm very excited to talk about this social revolution. And as well, one of the things I really love doing is I love connecting with community. So it's a great opportunity to really get engaged. And I think what's special about this webinar is we really want people to get involved all the way through the event. So definitely, when she's talking about the Twitter thing, we highly encourage people to jump on Twitter and join us.
Great. Thanks, Joel. And so I'll just share a little bit about who I am, too. So my name is Jill Hannemann. I am a Director of Advisory Services here at Portal Solutions. And so we're doing a joint collaboration with ViewDo today. And I'm a frequent speaker as well on SharePoint governance, information architecture, social strategy, and essentially I'm very excited about where social technology is moving and have a lot of questions to ask Joel throughout the course of this webinar. So just quickly about a couple words from our sponsors. Portal Solutions, we've been around for the last 10 years. We started working with SharePoint 2003. We've managed to deploy over 200 plus implementations of SharePoint, and we're located in 2 different areas, Washington, D.C. metro area and the Boston, Massachusetts area. And so I'm actually coming to you from Washington, D.C. today. And so, Joel, could you share a little bit about ViewDo?
Yeah, so ViewDo Labs, the first thing to understand is kind of where it came out of. It's interesting, when Metalogix purchased Exceller was already working on the incubation of this new product called Viewpoint. Viewpoint is this enterprise social analytics and insights tool. And when they purchased it, they bought the SharePoint business and allowed this new startup to be born, which is where ViewDo Labs came from. And it's really focused on enterprise social networking, both giving you insights into SharePoint, but specific focus into Yammer and being able to see them in this federated model of being able to see them side by side. And the roadmap includes Chatter in the near future, Salesforce Chatter, as well as Jive and other social technologies, and being able to get insights into what's happening and understanding adoption.
Awesome, great. So the format that we have for this conversation today is going to be a little bit different. As Joel mentioned, we'd like it to be really interactive, and since he's really interested in building communities, I'm also interested in understanding what your questions are and what your concerns are. We want to make this webinar as interactive as possible. And so we want you to talk to us, essentially. We have a hashtag at the bottom, hashtag portalview, that you can tweet to us at any point throughout this conversation. And I know Joel is actively monitoring his Twitter account, and we are going to be taking questions from any folks who tweet us essentially through this call. So you'll see it at the bottom of every slide, and if you think of something that you'd like to ask Joel, feel free to tweet us and let us know what you're thinking. So the focus of this conversation is to examine the evolution of the Internet. We're at a really interesting point in the industry right now where technology is starting to create a less structured dialogue between individuals in the workforce. And we're seeing a lot of productivity gains, and a lot of companies who are early adopters are really seeing productivity gains when using this technology. However, there's still a lot of skepticism. There's still a lot of questions about how best to deploy and how best to integrate technology like this in your own company. So we have a lot of questions for Joel today on how to, on his perspective of the Internet revolution. How do we leverage engagement, and also what strategy should you be looking at, and what are some tips that he can recommend for getting started with your own social strategy? So we have some stats to share with you all, and through those stats we'll have a Q&A with Joel, and Joel's going to be on the hot seat today. And then, again, feel free to tweet us and join in the dialogue and ask Joel some questions yourself. So with that, I'm going to hit our first stat, which is worldwide, only 13% of employees are engaged at work. And so this is from a Gallup study. And so quite frankly, it's a little surprising to me that when you think about how many large organizations we have, gross domestic product, that only 13% are engaged, and I find that this would be a figure that a number of C-level execs would want to know, how many people are truly engaged within their organizations. So Joel, perhaps you can give us some insight as to what your thoughts are by the statistic.
Yeah, I think there's a few things to explore here, and you brought up one of them, this question of, wow, that's a crazy number to think worldwide that only 13% are engaged. But the numbers are different per country, not too much different. In fact, if you dig into that study, you'll notice that, for example, in Europe, Denmark is is very well engaged. And what's interesting is I recently was just looking at this global study talking about the most corrupt countries in the world, and Denmark was #1 on the least corrupt country in the world. And so I found that kind of interesting. When you talk about transparency, Denmark being both very transparent and also being least corrupt, because they really are opening up their world and kind of showing what's going on in the organization. And I think it really, to me, talks about this idea of let's be more transparent with our employees. Let's be more transparent with our customers and open up communication. And yeah, there's definitely need for finances and things like that to be secure, but there's a lot of communication that if we can have more open dialogue and involve more of our employees with what's going on, people are going to be so much more engaged. And when you dig into that study, you'll find that engaged employees are so much more productive, and they're actually adding so much more to the bottom line. And if you look on the other end of the spectrum, you'll find that there are unengaged detractors that are inside of your companies that are actually pulling you down, that are hurting your reputation. And so what I find is there is an analogy here of understanding how organizations can change to be more transparent and to be more responsive to the needs of their customers and the needs of their employees.
So I think that that's a really interesting idea as far as the correlation between transparency and engagement. You know, kind of moving on to our next set of statistics here about, you know, why do we want to get our employees engaged? So even though, you know, we do examine country to country different cultures and whatnot as far as transparency and engagement, why is it that we want to encourage our employees to be more engaged?
You know, there's a story about an employee who they were hired into a call center, and in the call center they would hear the complaints from the customers and things like that. And this new employee started hearing these same complaints over and over and over again. And so they started taking notes of, man, if these little things could be fixed in this product, it would make such a big difference. And so, you know, as time goes on, this person making a pretty good list, and they go to their manager and they say, you know, I've been taking calls, you know, I've been following the path of, you know, what we're supposed to do in terms of giving them our typical responses. But some of these things, it seems like if we could just tweak these just a little bit, you know, fix some of these bugs or these minor UI issues, it would make such a big difference. And his manager scolds him and says, it's not your job to give product feedback. I'll take your list, but it's not your job to be trying to fix the product. You're supposed to answer support. Sends him back. Well, this employee kind of feels kind of begrudging a little bit and says, you know, these same calls, you know, time goes on, months goes on, nothing's happening, nothing's changing. So that employee goes to the manager's manager and again gets the same kind of feedback saying, what are you doing? It's not your job. You know, basically putting his own job at risk with the way that the organization's set up, this hierarchy. And ultimately that employee then goes to the president of the company and says, hey, I don't know if this is useful, but here's some things we might be able to do to our product. The president of the company sees those and says, oh, wow, these are great. We need to make some changes, implements them, and ultimately tracks down the fact that those employees, that particular employee who provided that feedback was very valuable, ended up promoting him within the organization. You know, long story short, that employee was rewarded for the work he did. Now, if you try and understand the way that organizations today are set up, nearly all of them are hierarchical. There's multiple layers in these organizations, and information is designed to not flow very well. There's so many checks and balances, so many, you can only talk to these people, you can only talk up to your manager, and your manager will then filter out things and so on. And so when it comes to things like agility and like product improvement or customer support and customer service, the engaged employees are going to both increase the satisfaction of your customers. It's going to be able to, you're going to be able to be more responsive around your products. And so there really is this idea of how can we actually change the organization from within to make it flattened out a little bit more. Rather than everything being so much hierarchical and having so much arcane process around communication and flow, that some of this does need to move more into a social network. The idea that everybody can connect to everybody else. And yeah, there's compliance and things like that you have to worry about, and it's understood that, yes, there's some flow around certain processes, but for the most part, especially around the way the organizations work, if there's a great quote, I can't remember who said it, but I'll have to track that down. It was in Adam Pisoni's keynote recently. He's the CTO of Yammer, and he spoke to, if outside the organization moves faster than inside the organization, that organization is doomed to failure. And I think that that's just so true. And I think that when we talk about engagement and we talk about how social can transform an organization, that's the type of thing that it can do.
So I think that that's a really compelling statement, and something we should all be really contextualizing as far as how do we examine our own hierarchy within our organizations and how we are communicating and sharing information. So the next slide that we've got is engagement's effects on key performance indicators, and I was wondering if maybe you could talk us through this graph a little bit.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, yes, there's positive effects of engagement, and what I like about this is this kind of speaks to, when you talk about what is the value we could possibly derive around making our employees more social, and what types of things should we be measuring? So these are some examples. For example, productivity increases, profitability increases, customers are happier. Things like safety incidents go down, the quality of products defects go down, turnover is reduced. People are happier, so they're more likely to show up at work. So your absenteeism types of things go around. So rather than just trying to put one particular metric to it, a lot of people are looking for quick, fast returns, and as well, they're, ROI is one of those things where it's like, how much ROI do you get out of your intranet? That's a really hard thing to say, and as well with your social network. If you're trying to get ROI and trying to squeeze it out in the first week, you're not going to see it. But these are the types of things you can measure. You can create a benchmark around these types of things, and to evaluate engagement around your employees and seeing the effect around things like key performance indicators, around things like customer satisfaction or productivity of your employees and so on.
So we hear this saying that all of us is smarter than just some of us. And what are your thoughts about this statement and the intranet and how social engagement is addressing this statement?
Yeah, that was a quote. I think it was from a former CEO of HP, and it's so true that when multiple people get together, you do get this multiplier effect that happens. Because people have different insights, people have different strengths and weaknesses, and ultimately as well, when we're stuck in a role, kind of going back to that story, when we're stuck in a role of thou shalt only do customer support, don't take product feedback, then it really keeps us limited, and there's things that we could be doing. So really, by being able to create these transparent, responsive organizations, it allows us to be able to not just have a single title. We can actually be an ambassador for the company. And there's some organizations that are playing around with this idea, and as we look to kind of the future, people's roles become less and less defined, and they end up being able to help in multiple product lines. They're able to be more resilient and being able to work on multiple things at once, and being able to work on various virtual teams, and information just flows so much faster. The expertise, you can really tap into it rather than it being locked up on some other team.
And I think also directly combat, a number of the KPIs that we see on this slide as well.
Yeah. And there's certain ones that some organizations are going to care more about, that just based on the organization type.
So kind of shifting gears into the evolution of the enterprise intranet. And so I thought this was a really interesting slide to acknowledge, where we've come from the 90s and where we are now. I work with a lot of customers who are looking to upgrade their intranet. They're looking to bring in social, but they're not really sure. And so I think that this diagram is a good way of looking at the trends of the market. But my question for you is, are we becoming too social? There's some new research that has been found that the average user spends 23 hours a week emailing, texting, and also using social media of other forms and other forms of online communication. So that number essentially represents around 14% of a person's time in a week. So how do you think an organization can justify bringing in social to promote productivity when it may just become another media outlet?
Well, I think that that's part of the problem is those activities. Part of the problem is that we have all these meetings just to try and communicate. And we also have email, which is becoming more and more inefficient in terms of our ability to communicate. Things get locked up. I saw a recent YouTube video that was talking about how one person was trying to communicate. You know, they were working on a document. They wanted a quick approval, so they sent that document to 3 of their fellow employees via email. Those 3 employees, one of them forwarded it on to another person. The other 2 responded back, and I think that's actually pretty good that they actually responded back. I think a lot of people would ignore it. but the one who forwarded it on sent it to a different person who then sent it on to somebody else. And the other 2 kind of felt like, oh, well, maybe that person shouldn't have been on here, so they sent individual replies back to the original person and complained. And then he said, you know, the original person replied back and said, hey, it's okay, you know, I wanted to get more feedback, so this is all good. And when he made some updates based on the feedback he got, he then sent that document out to everybody again. And through the course of this whole thing, it ended up being like 62 emails that were sent back and forth. That's a lot of chaos, ultimately, just to get a document reviewed or to get some feedback on a document. And I think that happens way too much. The reply alls where you're getting included on stuff, but you really don't need to be. And I think in some corporations, you know, when I was at Microsoft, I'm sure I was getting over 100 emails a day. And even now, working with my small teams, the majority of what we do is on Yammer, which is great. I've kind of found this transition to be great, to be able to very easily see what's relevant. And I think there is that transition of how can we stop using email as the main communication mode and move to something that's actually more efficient. And what I mean by efficient is you can quickly scan those threads to see what's relevant to you, and you don't have to read everything. I think if somebody wants you to see a very specific message, then they'll @mention you, or they'll include it on your team thing. And if you want to get daily or weekly reminders, it's up to you how much you really want to engage with the information. But it's there for archive purposes, it's there for search purposes, and you're actually building a knowledge base, where with email, it's a personal knowledge base. And for the most part, things are buried, and search doesn't work very well against email. So it's kind of this catch-22 of, yes, we spend a ton of time communicating, but how can we communicate more effectively? And I do think that social does provide a path to more efficient communication.
So that's interesting, the way you just described that, almost as if the unwieldy nature of email is less structured than social, when I think a lot of folks out there have the perception that social is very unstructured.
That's a good point. When you talk about structured versus unstructured, which even brings SharePoint into the mix here, SharePoint itself, I'm finding more and more that it's the structured system. Where before I used to think of SharePoint as being the unstructured, and you've got your other ECM systems, your document management, records management systems, being the repositories and where people needed to collaborate on documents and so on. Now SharePoint's kind of taking over that role, and as social becomes more accepted and becomes more successful, it's actually pushing SharePoint up the stack and essentially establishing itself as this very easy place for people to be able to collaborate, share information in an unstructured way, but with tagging and with ways of promoting and mentioning and so on. There is some structure to it, and you can even do, with some of the updates that are coming with Yammer around multi-user editing and some of those things with the integration of Office web apps. And as Office 365 integrates more and more with things like Yammer, it makes it easier for people to collaborate, where I think we will see more of the structured with things like note boards and promoting, recommending documents within groups and things like that, that we can get a little bit of the structure that we may lack.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, and so actually this slide with some statistics from a Deloitte study really do highlight, what you just said in your answer as far as addressing, are we being too social?
Yeah, let me just point out a couple things here. Newsletters. There's a lot of companies that do these newsletters, and people that are in charge of those newsletters do tons and tons of research to build these newsletters. If they send them out an email, people love those newsletters, right? They kind of glob onto these things, or they may ignore them. There's those too. But what happens for the new employee that comes in? If it's an email-only newsletter, there's no way for them to go find the archive. So it either needs to be a blended strategy of it gets posted somewhere on the intranet, or it gets posted in Yammer, as well as emailed out. Because email is just inefficient from a perspective of history. And with a lot of companies, you only get the last 30 days or 90 days anyway for compliance reasons or risk reasons that they don't want old stuff kept around. But the information in those newsletters can be very valuable from a knowledge perspective. And as well, when you look at the future of Yammer and the roadmap there, the work that's going on right now with distribution lists, they're moving those in. They're bringing in the idea that those who live in email can participate in these social networks, that there's an email associated with the groups that you're a member of. And the people can actually reply, and those will be included right in your news feed. So that kind of improvement is going to allow us to collaborate both with people who are trying to avoid it or are afraid of it or whatever. You can still bring them into that conversation.
So yeah, actually, I think that really addresses a very important point around change management. So actually, going back to the previous slide on our evolution scale, we have a question from our Twitter feed, and they ask, I think that the jump from 2.1 to 2.2 is pretty drastic. So how does social drive your work?
I think that the best way to kind of look at this, I think there's an example that's happening in sales that is really establishing itself. And that's basically the social that happens between a salesperson and their customers. So the social and CRM, and the social CRM, where there's a lead or there's an account team, the collaboration is so important around a deal. And I think that Salesforce and Chatter and even Yammer, for that sake, in terms of the integration with the Salesforce data that's coming in, and even with Dynamics CRM with Microsoft, being able to have that stuff show up in the activity stream and people being able to comment on it and collaborate about it, that's very, very key. I think that's really a big deal. And so when you talk about evolution of the intranet, it's that question of how can we make sure that everybody is aware of what's going on. So rather than thinking about it being just a microblog of people talking about updating their status of, what they ate for lunch and types of things like that, it's more about what are you doing right now, what questions do you have, and how can you tap this, the organizational mind that is this network. But as well, the activities that are going on from a perspective of, hey, I just met with this customer and this is the latest, or this customer just purchased the product. So everybody can know about those types of things. There's that information stream that happens. And as well, I think from that perspective of workflow, of being able to notify I recently saw, even with Office 365, one of the new features that's coming out, where in SkyDrive, when you're in SkyDrive Pro, when you upload a document, you can immediately share it in your stream. Whether you're using SharePoint Social or whether you're using Office 365 and Yammer integration, being able to quickly share that document with the organization, I think that kind of shows you the power there. If you're a blogger today in the consumer world, if you're not promoting what you've written on your Facebook or in your Twitter or whatever, you're totally missing out on the ability to inform your audience, inform your friends, you know. Whether you're a travel blogger or whether you're a technology guy or whatever it happens to be, you get so much more reach by sharing it. Now, and when you think about that from an organizational perspective, it really starts to make sense of how the intranet itself needs to expose that type of information. It needs to expose what really is going on and informing the organization and providing a way to tap into the organizational mind and building these knowledge repositories.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point, and I appreciate you walking us through the difference there between 2.1 and 2.2. Really good example.
Yeah, it's been so read-only. It's been so read-only, and it's been so just a few people that are in charge of getting this stuff out there that it's really been turned on its head of saying everybody owns it, everybody needs to get involved with it, and everybody needs to be able to leverage it, and we need a way to be able to both filter it and consume it. And so it puts the onus on those that are in charge of the intranet with finding a way to tap into those activity streams and to tap into the social streams in such a way that it's not just about what do the executives care about. It gives a voice to every employee. It democratizes the organization, really.
So we have a few quotes here. That one, Deloitte predicted that by the end of 2013, 90% of Fortune 500 companies will have fully or partially or fully deployed an enterprise social network, a 70% increase over 2011. So that's a pretty bold statement, and kind of further demonstrating and supporting this statement. I recently read an article by SiteWorld that Nationwide Insurance, they recently adopted SharePoint and Yammer as their enterprise content management and social network platforms. So in this case study, they claim that it saved them $1.5 million in licensing costs alone. So we're not even talking any other soft ROI. Then they also mentioned that they are that this technology also helps lower help desk tickets from thousands to less than 50, which is a crazy statistic. So you know, you've already talked about ROI a bit, but what other soft ROI have you seen organizations yield to help justify the productivity benefits of the enterprise social network?
I'll tell you some of the things that I'm seeing more and more is people talking about very specific lines of business. So rather than talking about how it's going to improve IT, which is definitely much more squishy, if you talk about sales, it makes sense for sales. These people need to be communicating with their account teams. They need to be able to communicate with their customers. Communication is so key to those relationships. And social forms stronger relationships with people who work on it. You know, emails, there's so much that are lacking when you get a new, you know, there's an org change, now you're talking to somebody new, and all that information that was shared with the previous guy is gone. It was in their inbox. So for sales, I think there's it's very easy, I think, to come up with the ROI, and really it's more of an REJ. It's the rapid economic justification for we're missing out huge by not leveraging social. And I think as well when it comes to there's sorry, it just fell out of my head. I think lines of business. So talk about a product line. Most companies have some product or service that they provide. If they can improve the speed, the agility for being able to take that product to market, and we talked about product defects, you're really going to be able to get so much more feedback, because every single employee is an ambassador of your company. They represent your brand, and they're talking to people all the time. So if you can give them a voice, how much better is your product going to be? And how much more quickly, if you're getting somebody, part of social, what it does is it removes those lines, it removes that structure, and allows people to talk together. So now you get experts together, and so ultimately what you find is the speed at which you can get products out reduces. So in some organizations, that's millions and millions of dollars. We were talking to GSK at the Working Social Tour, and they were talking about how they could shave a month off of a 2-year life cycle of getting their pharmaceuticals to market. It takes a long time to get some drug into the marketplace. And if they can shave a month off of that, man, that's huge, huge, both from a competitive perspective, from a market perspective, the revenue perspective. I mean, there's so many reasons why, if they can improve their time to market, that's huge. And if companies that are doing their services can improve them, then it just makes a lot of sense. And so going back to these numbers here, the 90% of Fortune 500 companies, what's really interesting is I've started digging into, well, Yammer is saying they're in 85% of Fortune 500s. Chatter is saying it's in, I forget what it was, I think it was 80% of organizations. And IBM was talking about how, something like 60 to 80% of organizations are licensed for their enterprise software, which includes connections. And I started looking at these numbers saying, well, it seems to me like there is no Fortune 500 that isn't involved at some level with some social software today. I think we're seeing huge penetration, but the challenge is on deployment and getting these things right. They're happening within lines of business. Sales may be using Chatter, IT may be using Yammer. Different lines of business are using different social software, and ultimately, in the long term, that's not healthy. In the short term, people are going to be able to get it, and they're going to understand it, but what are they missing out on if the platform isn't adopted enterprise-wide in terms of being able to reduce getting a product to market and being able to connect departments across lines of business?
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Well, so we've been talking about Fortune 500 companies, and I agree with you. I think with the size of the very largest organizations, social networks really do improve collaboration and productivity and improve transparency. But let's look at some of the small to medium-sized businesses. There are many of them, and many of whom are turning to products like Office 365 because of the attractive total cost of ownership proposition it brings. And what type of soft ROI or how would you approach looking at some of the productivity benefits that a small organization might be able to yield from this?
So the good news is an organization needs to spend very little to no time on ROI from social if they understand what it's doing for the larger organizations. And part of that is because Microsoft has lowered the bar so much on Yammer that basically if you've got one of these licenses for Office 365, and you're going to have to dig into it, but recently they made it such that Yammer is just included. You're paying for SharePoint Online, you're getting Yammer. So they've reduced that bar so low that you don't even have to spend any time on saying, well, how much, what kind of justification? It used to be that it was, $2 or $3 a user or whatever. Now we're talking that hey, the social software is there. Now, what do you need to do? Well, now you can spend that buck on analytics. And from an analytical perspective, now you can actually measure your ROI by finding those leaders, finding how people are using it, collecting those success stories, and mining the data of how it's being used in your SharePoint or your Office 365.
Okay, so addressing the skeptics and addressing the challenge of implementation, which you brought up, how do you respond to organizations who are afraid of bringing something like Facebook or LinkedIn into their culture? What I found to be really interesting with that Nationwide case study that I told you about is that Nationwide claimed that Facebook or LinkedIn was the type of experience that they were exactly looking for. So how can we contextualize this for those who are looking to adopt social and evolve their intranet but are concerned?
Okay, so I do think there's two ways of addressing this and two different attitudes that you've kind of brought up. First off, there are employees today that are in LinkedIn groups that are talking about stuff that is the business, that is the trade secrets, you could say. They're already in there and talking with partners or talking with other fellow employees, maybe even former employees. But these conversations are already happening on LinkedIn and in Facebook groups. And the organization, some of these organizations are saying, I need the Facebook for my company. I need the LinkedIn for my company because it's easy, and that's often what they're going after is they want the easy. And they also want the momentum. There's these social networks that are out there have such good momentum. They've got broad adoption. They've got broad appeal. So how could they take the success that's happening in LinkedIn and Facebook and translate that into a tool that's inside the organization that's being used to connect people, to being able to sharing skills and things like that. You look at the LinkedIn profile, and companies can only hope that they had as rich of company history that the HR department had, that list of skills and the list of education and what they did at these jobs. Man, from a resource perspective, wouldn't it be great if you had all the data that was just in LinkedIn? And when you create your SharePoint profile, as an example, man, sometimes there's so little data in there that, man, if we could just get what LinkedIn has as our profile, wouldn't that be so much greater? So just kind of talking to the skeptic on that side of why do people want it to be like those consumer technologies? It's because of what's already happening there from an adoption and feature perspective, and how these internal systems are seen as old and legacy and archaic and aren't as easy to use and aren't as efficient and don't get the adoption. And then addressing the guy completely on the other end of the scale who says, I don't want Facebook inside my company. I'm worried people are going to be in here playing games and spending time, wasting time talking about what they ate for lunch. And you get different attitudes and perspectives where some organizations would say, my goal is just to get up an environment where people could talk about whatever they need to because I need to get people talking. We need to break down lines of communication. So if we can set up a social system where people can talk about, the company softball team or whatever, or the bowling team, that's great. Let's encourage social because it's going to help for morale and that kind of thing. And what's interesting is they say, and you don't have to talk about work. Well, even in those environments when they say that, people will use it to talk about work. People will use it to get work done. So from that perspective, even the skeptic who says, I'm worried about people wasting time, you can put that stuff in your policies, and you can enforce it from a policy perspective and say, this is how it should be done, but you need to step back from trying to control your social networks. You can't control it. That's the herding cats problem. You need to be able to lead. You need to be able to set an example, and you need to say what's appropriate, but you need to keep it simple. because it could turn into another Facebook in terms of how it's being used, and whether that's a good thing or bad thing, the organization needs to decide. But I think that's part of the challenge is setting up a good enough example for how it should be used, because as it suggested, if you just turn on a platform and just expect people to use it and use it right, that's the provide and pray problem of just propping up a platform and saying go. You're not going to get the adoption. People aren't going to get it. They're not going to understand it, and people are afraid in the first place anyway. They need endorsement. They need policies. They want to understand how it's endorsed and managed as an information repository. People are going to be skeptical at first of putting themselves out there to ask questions or to engage other employees because they're afraid of what it could mean.
So how important do you view executive sponsorship of an enterprise social network?
Yeah, you really do need to get the right people involved so that it comes across as an endorsed platform and people understand how it should be used. Otherwise, you get the naysayers that say, you know, I went in there and I didn't see anything that was relevant to me. And those naysayers, the only way they're going to come back is if some executive says, I'm going to do a Q&A on here, and that same person who's likely a brown noser wants to get on there and get to know the executives. So that might bring them back. So there's ways to engage employees and to get them involved, but it really makes a difference to have an executive that has the vision for this platform, for engaging employees, for improving customer support, for connecting the sales people and the account teams and so on. It really comes down to, let's get the business involved. This isn't an IT platform. It's not an IT play. There's very little for IT to do. There's a lot of things they can get out of as well, but let's not look at this as another IT platform.
Very, very good point. So I just want to remind everyone out there who is on the call with us that you are still welcome to tweet any of your own questions for Joel. We have a Twitter handle, hashtag #PortalView, all one word, all lowercase, and it should be trending right now, I hope. And so feel free. We've got another 10 minutes, and we have some more material to cover with Joel, but I will gladly take any of your questions. So this next quote actually came from you, Joel, and it really does tie into a lot of what we've been talking about as far as implementation and building adoption.
Yeah, I'll just read this to you guys. Those tasked with deploying enterprise social don't know how to execute. So what they do is put the task with IT, setting up social platform, then they hope to build it and they will be good enough. And I think that does go very close to what the provide and play scenario is. It's basically the field of dreams kind of idea. That if we just set up social, which is what employees have been asking for, then they'll get off our backs. But the problem is with social, the social journey doesn't even begin until there's something in place. There's obviously policies and governance and trying to understand how to use it, and that's when the journey begins, is really understanding how do we encourage adoption. Once we've got adoption, how do we really build our business processes around it? What are the scenarios we should be using this for? How do we make sure it doesn't get abused? There's all those various considerations where you're bringing in ambassadors across the organization and brainstorming ways of building these solutions. It really hasn't begun until, the most simple thing to do is turn it on. And I think that's what's important for people to understand is your journey hasn't begun until you turn it on, which is obviously the case as well with SharePoint. Deployment it doesn't begin really until the lights are on. And I think that's part of this task of understanding that you don't just turn it on and start measuring it and it's a matter of, yes, you need to build your baseline, but you need to engage the employees, you need to engage executives, you need to have these ambassadors out in the organization to help understand how can sales or how can finance or how can your product lines take advantage of this system and really understand and get it, to build engagement, to connect experts, and all these things we've been talking about.
Well, and this slide also reinforces a lot of what you've already shared with us. But I guess another question I have for you is around company cultures. And for those that you have seen successfully adopt an enterprise social network, are there any similarities in aspects of their company cultures that you could share? Something that might resonate with our listeners about if their company would be a good candidate for an enterprise social network.
I think, going back to that key word in the intro when we were talking about transparency, organizations that are interested in having a flat organization that's transparent, they can go far and wide with it. Those companies who see it as, we have secrets we can't share with our employees can't talk to each other, we need to provide structures, hierarchies, to ensure that people aren't talking to each other. That's an organization where they could probably use it the most, but that they're going a direction that keeps them from being able to take advantage of it. Organizations that are looking for speed, agility, reducing their time to market, those that are trying to increase communication across departments, they're the ones who really can take advantage of it. Now, what's interesting is, in the consumer world, it has taken off in a huge way. How can we take some of that success that's happened in the consumer world and translate it into what can happen inside the business? I think that's the key there, is helping people understand that they're not going to get scolded for spending some time every so often kind of trolling around and reading the information and discovering employees that are inside the organization. If they're told that that's wasting time, then it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt adoption. It's going to hurt the platform, which is why the executives really need to be educated on this. And in fact, one thing that a lot of people are afraid of is they say, security would never let us have this. Legal would never approve. Those organizations that have really succeeded, they started by bringing in legal. They started by bringing in the lawyers and the finance folks. They started by bringing in the people who ultimately would be detractors and saying, what do you guys think? Giving them a presentation of what they want to do and what the goals are. Getting those people on board first, building the policies around that. When I was working on with a customer around getting Yammer embraced inside the organization, my biggest detractors ended up being my biggest evangelists for the platform. Security had given me a list of saying, these are the things that need to happen to make Yammer be something we can support. Every single thing on their checklist was included in the enterprise flavor of Yammer. So as well, conversations with security, they were saying, we would much rather have our data in an environment that we own, that we can control from a perspective of we've got our arms around it. They want it because people were already using LinkedIn, people were already using Facebook. And when we went to legal, they said, well, as long as you've got an agreement so that we can reduce our liabilities, then we'll be good. Well, we pretty much said, give us the agreement, we'll plug it in. And again, that was something that was addressed with the enterprise flavor of being able to have anyone that joins accepts the agreement. So I think that beyond that, it was how do we get HR on board? Well, what we found was there were some people in HR that thought we were trying to waste time and it was going to be, just this huge time waster. But we found others in the organization that saw this as, man, this will be great to ramp up new employees. And this could be a great communication channel. So we got those people on board, and ultimately it ended up being this huge success. And a lot of it was based on this idea of we're going to start small, we're going to set low expectations, and what we're ultimately doing is we're minimizing risk. We're not creating risk, we're minimizing risk of what's already happening in these consumer networks, and we're going to connect people, and we're going to monitor it. And we'll actually share the successes of what happens in here. And those are the things that really mattered in terms of taking it from an under the ground, shadow IT kind of solution that was out there to being something that was endorsed and embraced by the organization and is a platform tool for the organization.
That's really great advice. So we're down to 2 minutes, and we actually have 2 questions remaining that we've gotten in from our Twitter feed. So one relates to this conversation about how would you guide a reluctant executive, non-techie leadership into an engaged social network? We are in the health insurance industry.
So health insurance. I think that what you'll find with different industries is there are some great case studies that are out there. One of the places I would point you to is success.yammer.com. Success.yammer.com actually has a little tool built into it where it'll guide you through the process of creating certain scenarios or helping you understand how to address some of these things. But how do you get executives on board? I think that a lot of it is doing your research and finding out what is happening already, what is the status quo of a scenario that you want to change. What is some business process that could be improved? And you really don't have to find that very many of them. I think that you find a couple of them that end up being important scenarios. So some of those ones that actually probably matter most to that executive and helping them understand. Personally, I really like this idea of the engaged employee. It works from an HR perspective. It works from a sales perspective. It works from a general employee and customer service, customer support. There's a lot of case studies around different lines of business, and I think that ultimately, if you can kind of track against which executives care about which scenarios, there are some great articles, great white papers around those key scenarios. So whether they're somebody in HR or marketing, those may be the first to the platform. But trying to get a CIO on board, they may be a little bit more challenged by it, just from a perspective of Yammer's in the cloud. Well, what about SharePoint? Well, SharePoint alone is not good enough. Well, maybe we need a third party on top of it. So now we're spending money on it. I think that there's a lot of conversation, communication that likely takes place to educate somebody on it, to where it can ultimately become an initiative. And I think that those are some strategies there to get you started.
Great, thank you. So we are just about out of time, but I did want to hit one more point, which is the conversation about Yammer. And we had one last question to give you on whether or not you know how the integration between SharePoint and Yammer looks on Office 365 other than web parts, and where can folks go and see this demonstrated?
Sure. So there's interesting things that happen in when you're a Yammer. When you're in Yammer, there's a place called the YCN, the Yammer Customer Network. That's the first place to go. You can get an invite, get connected, get into the Yammer Customer Network. Once you're a member of the Yammer Customer Network, you then have access to their roadmap, and those they're posted in a very I think it's right off of the success.yammer.com. I could be wrong, but essentially, once you're in the Yammer Customer Network, you have access to what the team is actually working on. They're based on a very agile process, and the idea is that they'll let you know what's coming and what's coming along the pipe. There's a I think it's called Yammer TV. There's like a webcast that happens on about a monthly basis, and the last one that they did, they talked about their roadmap a little bit and they showed some demos. The Yammer social tour, the working social, the working social tour. That one, they have included demos of what's coming. And so basically the way that it works, the way they release stuff is it first goes to their networks so that it allows them to demo it. Then it goes to like a pilot set of customers who then can use it, and then it slowly works its way out to the broad everyone else bigger networks that are on Yammer.com. So they do a little bit of A/B testing, you could say, whereas they release it, they'll slowly release stuff. And with Office 365, the single sign-on is supposed to come by end of the year. You know, it's supposed to come in the winter here, U.S. time zones. And the part where you can create the Yammer feed in Office 365, that capability is already there. You go into your Office 365 admin, and you can wire it up so that when you click Newsfeed, it would say Yammer up there instead. And it's a simple radio button where you plug in your Yammer network. And even that will improve with the single sign-on. So single sign-on is also something that's coming, they say, in the winter. You know, it's happening in the next few months. They've already demonstrated in an event I was at, a public event, the Working Social Tour in New York, they demoed the new single sign-on functionality where if you're in Office 365, you can go over to, you can click onto your Yammer network without having to sign on. So that has been demonstrated. I don't think there's a place where you can go and demo it, but the internal, the network that Microsoft is on and the one that Yammer's on, the Yammer team, they both have that functionality. I'm not sure if there's a recording of that. It's very possible that that event was recorded.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Joel. We're just about out of time. So just a couple of final wrap-up pieces. Portal Solutions has a number of upcoming events. Actually, tomorrow in the Rockville, Maryland area, we're having an in-person event with the Tech Council of Maryland of Rockville, and it's going to be about beyond intranets, enabling a digital workplace, which a lot of this conversation focused around as well, but we'll be taking a little bit further. And on December 10th, we'll also be having an in-person event at our Tyson's Corner Microsoft store in Virginia. Mobile, the power of SharePoint in the palm of your hand. And if you do happen to be local to the Washington metro area, I would highly, highly encourage you to come to this event. We give away really good prizes. And usually the odds are highly in your favor that you'll win something, walk away with something good. And finally, last but not least, we are going to be doing a part 2 session of this series that we're doing with Joel right now, entitled Where Are You in Your Social Journey? And so we'll have another round of Q&A where I will have some hard-hitting questions to ask Joel, and he'll be able to share more intimate knowledge about social and strategy and the SharePoint Yammer platform. And feel free to register for any of those events, and we'll be sending out a registration for the January 23rd webinar very shortly. So last but finally not least, you know, we are offering a social analysis workshop as a result of this conversation. So if you are interested in some planning time with one of us here at Portal Solutions, please reach out and we'll be happy to schedule something. And finally, last but not least, connect with us. So here is Joel's information. Here is my information. And again, Joel, thank you very much for spending an hour with us today and imparting so much information and your experience on to the rest of us on this call.
Yeah, and I would like to mention one thing that was just tweeted. Matthew Ontel, he's one of the Yammer customer success guys. He put out a link to the Yammer TV webinars, which have been recorded. So you can see the upcoming Yammer events simply following that hashtag #PortalView. I also retweeted it. So if you look either at my tweet stream or at the Portal View, you'll be able to find the link to success.yammer.com events and so on. So you can find it through the Success portal on yammer.com.
Great. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. And any additional tweets that come through Portal View, Joel and I will be happy to address any of your questions.
Thanks a lot for joining us, and I appreciate the engagement.
Bye-bye.
Bye.